So today what we're going to talk about is abatement and the idea of, what happens if there's a whole bunch of cash legacies and not enough money to pay them all in full. So that's the concept of abatement. Abatement are the rules, set of rules that we have to say to administrators of estates, this is what's going to happen if there's not enough money left over. So one of the great features of eState is the ability to show clients the impacts of decisions. And this is one example of where that is relevant. So here we have Emily, and Emily, I'm just going to first start at the end and then we'll go backwards. But here we have Emily, and she has an estate of $3.2 million. And then she has certain assets going jointly. And then she's made a whole bunch of gifts. Now, the way this summary breaks down is that it breaks it down between, it gives you a total for all initial gifts, and then breaks it down between cash legacies and asset legacies. Then, as you know, it takes account of debts and taxes, et cetera. And then you'll see two balances here. And I just want to confirm everybody understands what those two are. So one is just a straight balance so in other words, sort of subject to the trust. Here we have a trust for the home to allow the kids to live in it for a period of time. So if we take that out of the calculation, we don't include the value of that home, you'll see that the residue of the estate is actually negative. So we don't have enough money to satisfy all of the legacies for as long as that trust is running for the home. Now, if we include the proceeds of the home after the trust is over, then that's what this $1,045,000 is. So it takes into account assets that are eventually going to fall into the residue, but might not be there immediately. So that's sort of how you can use the summary to show your clients, okay, here's the impact of these decisions. So the way abatement works. So in this case, let's assume that home doesn't, it goes in trust and is not available. Okay. So what happens is the first thing that gets used up is the residue, the balance of the estate. And in this case, there's no money going to the residuary beneficiaries at all. Okay. Certainly not until the home falls into the residue. And for our purposes, let's just assume there is no home at all. And so there'd be nothing in the residue. And we see it's a negative number. So it's below zero, which means there's not even enough to pay all of the initial gifts. And so the way abatement works is the first thing it does is, and we're going to concentrate on cash legacies, is that the cash legacy amounts are going to be reduced. And if we say nothing, the general rule is that they all abate. So they all get reduced equally, proportionately, not equally, but proportionately. So you take the total amount of the legacies, 375, you take the first legacy worth 100, you take that percentage, it's 100 out of 375, that's going to be the amount, the percentage that they're going to get of whatever money's available to satisfy the initial gifts, which we're going to say in this case is less than $375,000 that you would need to satisfy them in full. That makes sense so far? So, so that's what we've got. Now, in this case, just as an example, you would see that there is no money to pay any of the legacies because this amount, the negative number, is greater than 375, right? If this number was minus 100, then there would still be some money available to satisfy. There'd be, $275,000 to be able to satisfy the legacies that are equal to 375,000. So they'd all be reduced pro rata, proportionately, or ratably is the language of the legislation. So that's the general rule. And the next part I want to say is, well, what happens, whenever you see this sort of situation, if you're planning for a client and you're going through the numbers and and you show the client, oh, by the way, there's not going to be enough money. I mean, based on the numbers that we're using today, there may not be enough money. Now, there may always not be enough money because the circumstances might change and other things might go. But so it's always a good idea to mention the possibility that what happens if all of these can't be paid in full. So option one is the client just says, yeah, no, that's fine. Ratably, the general rule is fine. Just deduct, reduce them proportionately. No problem. But sometimes they say, well, that's not exactly what I want. I want certain legacies to be paid in full in priority to other legacies, right? And that's where eState can help with that. Because you can see when you create a cash legacy that there's a priority of payment field here. And so a number one priority is obviously gets paid first. If everybody's a number one priority, then they'll be paid ratably. But you can set different ones in different order. So in this case, what we've got is Ashley's legacy gets paid first priority. Let's check Julie's. Julie's also gets paid first. So those are going to both be paid in priority to other legacies. Then we've got Sophia. She's going to get paid in third priority. And that must mean that we have a second priority here. So let's add these guys as the second priority. If we didn't have a second priority, it would automatically make the third priority the second priority. It recognizes it's a higher number than one, and so it just treats it as the next number. So, but in this case, what we wanted was Ashley and Julie to get their money first if there was enough. Now, if there was enough to pay them both in full, the next people to get paid were the grandchildren. And then if there was still enough to be paid, then it was Sophia. So that changes the general rule that we have about ratably, ratable abatement. So let me just show you sort of how that would then generate in eState. So we would go documents, single will, just generate that. And I just want to take you to the provision that's going to automatically be generated to take into account the priority of payment. So here we have Emily's will. We'll skip right to the legacies. So it's going to produce the legacies, right? And then it has this clause that says, look, here's the order that I want you to put them in. The legacies in paragraph A and B, okay, A and B, they're called the priority one legacies. They'll pay in full in priority to any other legacies. And if there's still not enough to pay them all, then they'll abate ratably between the two of them. Now, if you've paid for, after providing for the priority one legacies, the legacy in paragraph D, that's these ones for children, grandchildren, get paid in priority to any other legacies. And then after providing for the priority two legacies, that's this one, then we've got the priority three legacy, which is Sophia's. Yes, Sophia's. So even if they don't go in the right, like this straightens out the order in the sense that it explains what gets paid in what order. And that's how the priority legacies work. So that's that. So let me switch back to this. So I've given you an example of how to do that. Let me talk about a specific case when you would want to raise this as an issue in priority. So here we have, we have all this money, and let's do one thing. Let's get rid of, in the scenarios, let's get rid of the house for a second. So let's pretend there's no home. Let's just make sure that's the case in here. And so we're going to get rid of the home throughout. Let's see if I can delete it. As long as it's not a gift, then we can delete it. So now if we go to the summaries and we're looking at this scenario, we don't have enough money, right? And the residuary beneficiaries, I think in this case, are the kids, right? So they might say, look, we're making a bunch of these legacies to other people. Don't you want to make sure that the kids get at least a certain amount? And if so, so what you could do there is give the kids the first X dollars, and then everyone else would then get, if there's enough money, to pay the kids in priority. So the way I would do that is I'd say, okay, I want a cash gift, and I want to give that to the children, right, of 50,000 or whatever number you say you want the kids to get as a minimum. So in this case, if you wanted to make sure that they got at least the same as the other legatees, you might say, okay, give the first $375,000, right, divided between the kids. And that's going to be a priority one gift. Oops, I created something that didn't exist. That would be a priority one gift. And then I would make the other gifts a lower priority so that the children would get their money first. Okay. So that's an example where you really want to consider the implications of abatement. Whenever you're giving significant initial gifts, you might want to say, like, just in case, right? Because this really does no harm. If there's more than $375,000, the residue is going to the kids anyway. So if there's enough to satisfy all the legacies, you're great. But just in case there isn't, maybe think about doing a priority gift to the children. So that's my little example there. Anybody have any questions about abatement? My asset doesn't exist. Oh, that's my home. That doesn't exist. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Have you ever done it where you might say, if my estate is worth more than $1 million, I want these gifts, but if my estate is less than $1 million, these are the special gifts?
Right. We can't do that yet. And the one thing I would say about that, I think maybe the idea is to set a legacy. Like the way I would deal with that typically is because estate, so in other words, if the residue is more than $1 million, then make these gifts, I guess, is what you would be doing. The other way to do it, I guess, is to do it with a priority legacy. So if that were my instructions, I probably would do it the other way. I'd say, yeah, who are these people that, if it's less than $1 million, what happens to it? Oh, I want that to go to the kids. Great. So let's make a priority legacy of $1 million to the kids. Now make the legacies in second priority, and then give the residue to the kids. And that sort of accomplishes the same thing. I will look into that idea where you might want to make a condition of the gift to be in a certain minimum amount. So we'll add that to our list to consider. Now, of course, you can always manually draft that, right? So if you wanted to say here, whatever conditions you want to put, if the residue of my estate or, my net estate or whatever language, then pay. So you can just manually do that, right? My estate, whatever language you would normally use now. Again, sometimes I'm not sure, you might not know that right away, obviously. And maybe that's exactly the point, that you won't know that right away. But that's my preference, is to put the legacies a priority legacy. But if it's this complicated situation where you don't want to do that, you want to just put in a condition, then just begin the initial gifts with that condition. If my estate is greater than, than $1 million, that kind of thing. So, or maybe the language, do you have any language that you would typically use there?
Sorry, it's very, very similar to that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I would say, if after, if the residue of my estate would be, before the payment of these legacies greater than, something like that, that probably would be the wording, just thinking off the top of my head. That's maybe the wording I would use there. And that works fine. So you can just do that manually, I think. So there, yeah, there are lots of different ways to skin the cat there. I guess we shouldn't use that term. That's not the nicest term I've ever used. And I'm the board on the board of directors of the Alex Gurn Cat Welfare Foundation. So that wasn't very nice. Let me just see what else we have. Yes. So Blake is asking about the difference between redemption and abatement. So yeah, abatement is dealing with cash legacies. Redemption is dealing with where that a specific gift of an asset and that asset doesn't exist anymore. And so that's redemption. So I give my piano to John, but I sold the piano before I died. Then John is out of luck. Doesn't get the equivalent or anything like that, absent different kinds of draft. Virtual signings, I don't know the answer to that. I believe it has, but don't quote me on that until we can. I'll reach out to Ian and see if he is. I don't know if most people are using those virtual signings. I've tried to stay away from them as best I can. For now, I find them difficult logistically, but for sure, let me get back to everybody, and we'll probably, I'll ask Ian to post something on the Holland Hull website about that. Anybody know the answer to that question? I haven't actually looked at it today, so. Any other questions about abatement, etc.? Right.
Jordy, it's Teresa.
Yes, Teresa.
Hi. It's not really about abatement, but it's kind of about legacies. And I wonder if other people have had similar situations, because a lot of couples have joint assets. So I, from time to time, have situations where the couple has all of their assets joined, and one of the spouses wants a certain legacy to be paid out if, let's say, the wife dies first, but understanding there's no money there. And so she wants it paid out of the joint assets, you know, as a wish. But then if she dies second, then the legacy is to be paid, but only if it's wasn't already paid out by, let's say, the spouse, the husband. Right. And I'm just wondering, probably not, but is there any way that your program might be able to deal with that situation? Or I'm assuming
no, because, and deliberately no, because that gives a false sense of security, I think. What it does do is illustrate, and it's a perfect illustration. If we go to the surviving spouse scenario and we show, look, everything is joint, right? I keep getting this error because I deleted an asset and now it's, tell me that there's an error. But right now, and I show, oh, by the way, I want to make a legacy to this person, of Eric for, $500,000 or whatever it might be. It doesn't matter if it's more than $1. You say, look, sorry about that. You look, I don't, you don't have that money, right? So whatever you're going to wish, it's a wish. And that's all it is. And in fact, in our reporting letter that's coming soon, one of the things it warns you is you've made legacies, you've made initial gifts. So make sure that, when one of you dies, so make sure that you don't own everything jointly, because there won't be enough money to satisfy those initial gifts. So that's a warning because of course that beneficiary is reading the will and they're like, well, you screwed up, right? Because you didn't tell them to keep money in their own name. And now I don't get my legacy, which is what you don't want, right? So.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's a constant battle with the program between allowing you to do anything that you might do, which maybe in the right hands would be fine, but we want to prevent people from making mistakes. So, and of course you can always override that. You can always say, here's a legacy. If it's, I really want you to make that, but if it's not made, then I want it made, and document that. That's the other thing, is that you want to document that. So, good question, because it happens all the time, right? you know, that's why I always say, look, you know, joint assets, and that's why you can illustrate it, you know, that look, you know, joint assets are passing outside the estate and there's nothing there. You know, when you look at the estate, so when you want to make your distribution to somebody, look what's left, you know, in the estate, right? Well, this case isn't this is the second one, right? So there's nothing there, right? It's negative. So that's the idea, that you would, you know, want to show them. Okay. So other questions? The good news for anybody who was, oh, sorry. Did somebody, Trevor,
Yeah.
did you have a question? Yeah.
Yes, Jordy, I was just wondering, you guys have a short form of the will also, an estate planner. So
Yeah.
like, I'm wondering, like, because you mentioned at one point that was because lawyers were requesting that, but like,
Yeah.
is there a specific situation, like if there's an adult couple who own like a house and a bank account, where you would use like a shorter will as opposed to the longer form will, or?
Yeah. Well, what we did, so because I was afraid that somebody might use the simple will and not include, and I want to make sure that even the simple will would have all the necessary definitions and provisions regardless. Okay. So in a sense that like this is a simple will. This one I just generated with this abatement issue, but even if it's a simple will, if abatement is an issue, like if you've made priority, then it's going to include those provisions. Like I don't care if you want a simple will or not. So I want to make sure you're covered on that front. You know, I mean, when I always use the full version, but you know, people don't want all the powers in it. You know, if you look sort of at and in our help desk, there's that breakdown of what's not in a simple will. And I'm just going to try to go to that right now. You know, what's not in a will. And if you're satisfied not to, okay, that's, you know, maybe look at it once and just say to yourself, okay, I can use that, you know, anytime. I think it's called simplified. I can use that anytime I don't have this issue or that issue, right? So, you know, here is, if you go to, you know, what are the major differences if I choose to generate the simplified provisions? And if you click there, it'll open up a compared version. So you can see, okay, like, would I be okay with, you know, laws of province of Ontario? Probably, I wouldn't have a problem with that. You know, do I need any of these clauses? You know, probably yes, no, whatever. And that's sort of the call you make. So I prefer the longer version, but lots of people, you know, say, well, I don't need this thing about forming a limited company and I don't need any of these clauses. So, you know, now what we're hoping to have completed relatively soon is the idea that you'll just pick, you'll create your own simplified will in a sense. You'll pick which clauses you want to include and save it as your simplified will. And you know, then you could be more comfortable with that, and you could have multiple different ones. So, but it's not yet there. Coming. So, it's number one on our list.
Thank you.
Yep. So, so the other, we're going to start being able to accredit these webinars. So you'll get, you know, half an hour of professionalism. No, sorry, half an hour of substantive, and depending on the topic, maybe some professionalism as well. So that'll be good as well. So, so that's that.
Jordy, I have, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Blake.
Can I ask a question, Jordy? And
Sure.
it's not about today's topic exactly,
Sure.
but it is about one of the powers that's accorded to the executor.
Yep.
I have a recent client. He's sort of uptight about the retention of assets. The estate trustee may hold any of my assets in the form in which they may be at the time for any length of time, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And
right.
he's
That's
saying, I would like some ultimate limits specified. I wouldn't want my trustee just sitting on the assets indefinitely and not disperse them.
Right. There is, this does not, if it's an immediately distributable estate, this does not allow them to hold it indefinitely. So all of these powers, you know, I mean, they're within the scope of a fiduciary's duties.
Mhm.
Like nothing in here says, you know, even if I said you can steal all the money, you know, that's probably not gonna protect them. So in this case, it's just to protect them, you know, they still have the duty to administer the estate as quickly as possible. I mean, this doesn't say hold it in trust for somebody, you know, and so, but again, this is, you know, if they don't like that, you could say, look, you know, you might want to add another line here that says, you know, notwithstanding that this right, it's my, you know, I'd encourage my executors to you know, sell, you know, liquidate assets as quickly as possible, you know, and something like that. But the idea here is, you know, you don't, you know, if it's not a good time to sell, and it's an asset that the testator had that really wouldn't be prudent to hold on to, but, you know, if it was for a trustee to invest in, for example, but, you know, they got to hold on to it because it's a terrible time to sell. Well, we don't want them liable for that. So I think that's really the purpose there.
And by what he's proposing, you know, putting a time limit of, for example, 1 year, that's really handcuffing your executor. That could be.
What happens if you can't get probate for a year? What happens if there's a will challenge? What happens if,
Exactly.
you know, there's a pandemic? You know,
Yeah.
if he can, you know, I would say to clients, like, may want to put this differently, but, you know, I'd say, look, if you know exactly what's going to happen in the future, then I'll put it in. But if you know, you're not going to be here like that, by definition, you're not going to be here. So, but we can put in suggestions, we can put in, you know, and the other thing I would say is if you're really worried that your trustee would do that, then probably don't pick them as a trustee.
Yeah.
If you think they're going to hold on to it for, you know, for 4 years for no reason, just to spite the beneficiaries, then that's the wrong person to pick.
That was a bad choice for trustees.
You know, so, and usually they back off after I've given them that little talk about, you know, maybe you shouldn't pick these people if you're worried that they're going to take of all the powers, that's what they're going to use to abuse the beneficiaries, you know, sort of thing.
And one other thing, but I know I'm monopolizing your time, sorry.
No, that's fine.
I was talking to Brittany lately, maybe she hasn't had an opportunity yet to broach this with you, but dispute resolution mechanisms when it comes to both powers of attorney and executors there.
Yes.
It sort of doesn't come up in the will.
Right. So let's just talk about that for a second. So I think we've sent anybody who asked for it, we sent them sort of a mediation type clause for a dispute. So we're building all those elements that are not yet there. So they're coming. But but yeah, I mean, the ways of dealing with disputes among whether they're joint trustees or joint attorneys, you know, there's no great, you know, mechanism. If they don't agree, you know, we have options for, you know, mediation, or another option that I've used before is if they can't all agree, I'd appoint, so in other words, have an alternate that says, okay, if any of them say that they're in a dispute, then automatically they all get removed and the alternate takes over. And just make sure that the alternate is a very expensive trustee, and that seems to keep everybody in line. But that's another way. But there's no great way, and that I'm aware of, and you know, but I certainly open up the floor to everybody here to say, you know, what other options there are. And I don't have I have my little precedent thing where I have little options, but, you know, resignation, mediation, you know, arbitration by a selected party. You know, those are the big ones that, you know, that I can think of. Anybody have any other suggestions? Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. You know, you want to appoint the kids because you don't want to pick one of the other, but they don't get along that great. And so what do you do? and it's not easy. You know, I will circulate the mediation clause for sure. It should be built into the e-state shortly, but I'll for sure circulate it.
I've recently had that, Jordy, and they just picked Canada Trust.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like trust companies are a good option. You know, nothing brings people together like a common enemy. And, you know, when they see that, oh my God, look at what they're charging. Yeah, you're right. They've never gotten along so well. So it's just after 1. I'm going to, unless there's anything else that pops to mind, I'm happy to stick around for a couple more minutes, but we'd like to keep this to a half an hour. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week. And yeah, and we continue to build out things. And we have some, next on our list is charities. You're going to be able to automatically find whatever the charity that you're looking for using the CRA list, and make sure it puts in the right name and the right number and all of that. So that's our next feature that's coming soon. So stick with us. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good afternoon.